Welcome and thank you all for joining us for this video accompaniment to the BALLE 101 Toolkit, which is BALLE's compilation of resources for localists looking to catalyze local economy action in their communities. The full toolkit is available at the BALLE website, www.bealocalist.org, and has a comprehensive collection of materials and resources to help you start and advance your work. Community development corporations and technical assistance providers are the local economy ecosystem model that this video will be exploring. We are fortunate to have strategic consultant and senior BALLE fellow Jay Badhard-Boll as our moderator for this conversation. Jay, take it away.
Thanks, Andrew. Happy to be joined with yourself and D'Artagnan and Alpha today to talk about how this work looks like and feels like in our communities, and whether they're in communities of color or dominant society. I think we're in for a fruitful discussion and kind of handhold some people that may not be. I think they're a good fit for the BALLE framework, and I think there's always a place for everybody at the table. My name is Jay Badhard-Boll. I'm a strategic consultant, and I recently transitioned out of a nonprofit organization in South Minneapolis, working around 4 different pillars: community engagement, community organizing, community development, and all doing that work through the lens of art in our community and making our community more vibrant. And looking at how the impact we had in our community here locally versus some opportunities that we've missed or we could have expanded upon has really propelled me forward. And part of it is also with my BALLE fellowship, being exposed to new ideas and trends and opportunities. And I think you'll hear a lot of that come out in today's discussion with D'Artagnan and Alpha. And I would like to turn it over to Alpha to introduce herself and her organization and her work.
Great. Thank you, Jay, and great to be on this conversation that is so timely. So very appreciative of BALLE for doing this for our overall field. So my name is Alfa Demmellash. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Rising Tide Capital. The organization that I co-founded has been working in northern New Jersey, in Jersey City, for the past 10 years plus. And so we've been at this for a little bit and are happy to share some of the lessons that we've learned. By way of introduction, Rising Tide Capital is a provider of business management education and the kind of one-on-one individualized coaching support for local entrepreneurs as they're getting started and growing. We provide access to market opportunities through a network of partners. We provide access to financial capital also through a network of partners, so we are not a direct lender. Our typical entrepreneur is a mom. She's earning about $35,000 from working a full-time job, often, sometimes even 2 jobs, often low-wage job, and the business or enterprise is something that she is working on as a way of eventually getting out of that low-wage work or supplementing her income while she's growing to be a sustainable local enterprise that can go on and provide employment to her neighbors. And so the work, typically the way we explain it is as being focused on knowledge capital, so the know-how that women need to be able to operate a successful business, as well as social capital, so strengthening her networks from fellow entrepreneurs to potential partners to customers to incubators and space providers, everyone within the network that she would need to build a kind of resilience for her business for long-term success and growth. And then the access to financial capital piece which can go anywhere from building her credit. A lot of times, many of our entrepreneurs at the local level are struggling to manage their personal finances, and so supporting the strengthening of her credit all the way to accessing the kind of capital that would enable her to grow appropriately. So that is a little bit of the overview, but we'll be happy to dive in into what this work looks like.
Great, thank you, Alfa. D'Artagnan, can you give us a brief introduction of yourself and your work?
Absolutely, and it's a pleasure to be here in this conversation with all of you as well. I'm really excited about the work that BALLE is doing. I think in many ways trying very diligently to achieve equity, and so much of what I'm going to be talking about today centers on this idea that equity is possible, especially in communities where CDCs and or community development corporations or community development financial institutions are not as integral in the localist work here, where they serve really as traditional models. And so I am the executive director and founder of the Social Justice Learning Institute, which is a nonprofit that's committed to closing disparities in both education and health. Our mission is to improve the education, health, and well-being of youth and communities of color by empowering them to enact social change through research, training, and community mobilization. I'm also a 2013 BALLE Fellow and really excited about the efforts to advance localism here within our communities. Much of the work that we do at SGLI centers on providing educational opportunities for young folk, and so and residents who are traditionally marginalized and or excluded from economic opportunity. So we work with young men who are on probation or involved in the system, as well as youth of color who are looking to graduate high school. In the state of California, we know that if a young person does not graduate, a young man does not graduate high school, he has a 90% chance of being incarcerated. And so what we work to do is ensure that first our young folk are able to graduate, and then secondly, move into a meaningful enterprise that allows them to be entrepreneurs, transform their communities, and take care of their families. And so we're committed to doing that work, and we do that in the areas of food and food justice as well. And so for us, we believe that it is important for communities to have food sovereignty, for them to be able to feed themselves in strategic ways. And so one of the strategies that we use, and we'll talk a bit more about this later, is the development of a community-supported agriculture program whereby our local residents are able to grow food, take that food and aggregate it, and then redistribute it through a community-supported agriculture program or community-supported agriculture share or bag, which allows them to feed a family or 2 to 3 in the form of a social enterprise and help sustain that food. We've also been able to do that through a farmer's market where we've worked and partnered with local artisans to help them bring their goods to market. So we have what's called cottage food vendors, or vendors who produce goods at their home, and we help to bring them, or rather help provide opportunities for them to sell those goods in our local marketplaces, while working with our local business expansion clubs to facilitate economic development and ownership for residents in our community.
Thank you very much. And just for some context for our viewers and listeners, D'Artagnan's work is in Inglewood, or based out of Inglewood, California, and Alfa's is in Jersey City, but is expanding as far as I know. And so I think to start off with, I mean, we all see a lot of disparities in each of our regions. I'm in the Midwest, and you guys are on the coast. And I think the common denominator is access to opportunities. And so what I kind of want to pull out is, how did you, D'Artagnan or Alfa, establish the kind of model that you're working under, and how did you go about incorporating? I think both of you are nonprofits. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's correct.
So either of you, can you answer the question of how did you establish either Rising Tide Capital or the Social Justice Learning Institute?
I'll start. We started our organization as a nonprofit. When we were first starting out, we're having a lot of conversations in one particular community in Jersey City. Jersey City, just to give you an idea of what the place is like, is right across the river from New York City. There's a ton of new development on what is called the Gold Coast, very prime real estate on the waterfront facing New York City. And then you have a downtown area that has a lot of artists and kind of up-and-coming, rapidly gentrifying area. And then the area where we were in, or where we had our start and still are headquartered in, is in the Bergen-Lafayette neighborhood, 99% African-American, about 25,000 people, working class, and very much struggling. There is, definitely that development on the waterfront has not been shared. So this idea that, rising tide lifts all boats became a subject of conversation for us as we were meeting local entrepreneurs in that community in Bergen-Lafayette, and seeing that there is actually a very strong interest and entrepreneurial spirit that was kind of looking out on that waterfront area of development and trying to figure out how do people who've been there for a long time, who've sacrificed, who have those entrepreneurial aspirations and businesses, how do they participate in that growth? And how could we have a story of shared prosperity? And that's where, when we started out, and that's actually how we named the organization Rising Tide Capital, we realized that, rising tide can lift all boats, but it lifts boats, not people. And that we do need to build boats, and so that's when we said, the work of building boats, these vehicles that can enable people to grow wealth, enable them to be able to do some of the things that we're talking about within the local economy, that work could not be done in a for-profit model. A lot of the entrepreneurs we were talking to and meeting and befriending were not in a place where they could afford the kind of consultancies, advisory services, a lot of that, the knowledge capital, the social capital piece that many who are in the more advantaged part of town had access to, but many of our entrepreneurs didn't, and they couldn't afford to go hire McKinsey. They couldn't afford, they were not in a place where they can go to a privileged higher ed institution and start networking and accessing research and IP. That wasn't the kind of world that they were tapped into. And so the question became, how do we bridge the gap where necessary? Where do we, build from scratch where that had to happen? And where do we connect a lot of these many times isolated entrepreneurs, and that work was not going to happen in a for-profit model. So we established as a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We formed a board of trustees. We formed an advisory board made up of a lot of these professionals, whether you're accountants, your web designers, your lawyers, and so on, to be on board and give their time pro bono or at a discounted rate for our entrepreneurs. And the model of being a 501c3 nonprofit is really one in which you're enabled to be able to access volunteer services, but also get the kind of grants and financial support that would enable you to do this work. So that's why we chose to be a nonprofit.
Great, thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about the model that you're working under, D'Artagnan? You kind of hinted at it in your introduction, but maybe give an overview of the legal entity and what is the revenue model that you guys are operating under.
Absolutely. So excited to share this with you all as well. We are a nonprofit that really began with the idea of being sort of a mission-driven social enterprise in many ways. Ultimately, we began because of a need, and so similar to Alpha, we were working in the city of Inglewood and within the South Bay area of Los Angeles. So for those of you that are not familiar with LA, that's around the LAX area. So when you come into LAX, you have to go through basically the city of Inglewood to get to anywhere else. The city of Inglewood was predominantly economically vulnerable, so a lot of our residents faced financial challenges. Was not the type of place where a Whole Foods or a Trader Joe's would want to put a store, given their policies as well, and was also the plagued for quite some time with a reputation of having increased gang activity, etc. I grew up in the city of Inglewood, and it was upon returning home after having served in the Navy and finishing my PhD at UCLA that I decided to come back and work with our young folk so that they can go on to become our next sort of set of leaders. And as our young folk began to get involved in the work that they were doing, we were teaching classes in the local schools, and I developed a curricula. As they became involved, they began to see some of the disparities in their community. And it was in the context of our community and looking at what we had and looking at the access to resources or the lack thereof that our young folk decided to launch a food justice effort. So they decided to build a community garden so they can sell and distribute fruits to folk in the community. And it was when they decided to do that that others in the community wanted to get on board. And so we had a number of residents that came and said, hey, I want to grow gardens. I want to be a part of this local food system initiative. And so we committed to building 100 school, community, and home gardens in and throughout the city. And as a result, decided to launch a social enterprise in support of that effort, allowing local residents to grow food and to sell to each other. And that's what led to the sort of foundation of our community-supported agriculture program. But it was really based on need, and so we decided to pursue a nonprofit enterprise model because we understood that it was much easier to build and seek philanthropic support for our efforts than it was to receive capital as an investment, as a business. And so one of the values, I think, that we wanted to hold on to as an organization and as a community was to create space and opportunity and access for everyone, and we knew that we could do that through this model. We subsequently built a for-profit enterprise to help house some of this work and still found that we were having those challenges. And so what we decided to do is instead, as a nonprofit, bring local entrepreneurs into the fold and create spaces for them to sell their goods and to sell their enterprise, which is one of the reasons we launched a farmer's market, amongst other things that we've done. And so as we thought about our revenue model, we realized that we wanted to have programs that were sustainable, but that we needed to seek investment. And for the types of programs that fit the need of people in our communities, i.e. access to good food, a nonprofit organization that could pursue philanthropic support made more sense for us at the time. And so it was important for us to understand really the need. Much of what we've done as an organization has grown out of the need within the community. And so that's led to our business model. So we currently have programs that are supported through our partnerships with local foundations, as well as the LA County Department of Public Health to support and sustain our work. But we also have programs that bring in revenue that help to break even on the cost of those programs as well. And so we've been really excited about both the growth in our model, but also our ability to expand impact. So whereas we started with a small group of young folk and community members we've now grown into serving more than 13,000 folk through our programs in the Los Angeles area, from East Los Angeles to Long Beach, as well as in the Sacramento region as well. And so we've been able to replicate our model throughout the state, allowing for others to take advantage of both the things that we've learned as well as some effective practices that they can also apply in their communities.
Wow, that's impressive work. Congrats to both you and Alpha on doing some amazing initiatives and really improving your communities. And as we know, the nonprofit model is kind of a double-edged sword at times. I think it's one of the sectors in our society that you still can be really creative in. But there's also, you know, you're writing grants and you're having to provide outcomes and indicators for philanthropic institutions that may not be in total alignment with yourself or with your organization. So you kind of have to bend and be flexible. And I think both of you are great examples of being creative, especially in the face of a lot of disparities and a lot of things that are not really improving our community. So you all, and the BALLE community especially, has taken upon ourselves to really be those agents of change and to really be creative. So congrats to both of you on that. And, you know, moving on further into this discussion around money, right? And how do we keep the dollar in our community? How do we turn it over multiple times? I know in the Native community here in South Minneapolis, the dollar comes into our community much like on a reservation in a rural area. It'll come in and it'll go right back out. And I know it's like that for a lot of communities of color throughout the country. So with the models that you guys have established, what do your budgets look like on an annual basis? Is there a lot of fluctuation? Are they pretty steady? Is it, you know, have you had any problems scaling? And what are the biggest obstacles for your budgetary needs as organizations?
D'Artagnan, do you want to continue, since you are talking a little bit about revenue generation, and I can fill in?
Absolutely, absolutely. So when we first began, you know, as a typical nonprofit, much of the investment, I think, was personal, both for me and as well as a number of individual donors. Over the years, we've been able to bring in sort of a good mix of revenue with an annual budget of about $1.2 million currently and 16 staff. We've been able to fund our work through government grants and contracts. We've also been able to fund it through foundation support as well as corporate support. But one of the things I'm very proud of is the fact that we've been able to pursue what's called earned income or earned revenue. And so because we're able to demonstrate a model that works in communities, especially with young men of color in the context of the environment that many of our young folk, and especially African-American communities, have been dealing with across the country, we've been able to replicate that model and to share that model with others, and that provides revenue for our organization to sustain the work and to reinvest into these other programs. We've also been able to work very closely with private family foundations to invest in capacity building efforts, things like strategic planning, fund development, or revenue generation through for our social enterprise, so that we can sustain our work over time. And so I've been really proud of our ability, I think, to grow our revenue as well as sustain our programs. And I think for us, it's important to have sort of a diverse set of resources, so that ultimately, if at any given time priorities for, and I think you mentioned this earlier, Jay, that foundations or organizations have a certain set of priorities, they require outcomes. If those outcomes and those priorities do not meet our mission or our goals, then we're not going to pursue those resources. And so having a diverse set of resources allows us to avoid mission creep, and allows us to stay focused on the need in our community. And that's one of the things that we're really critical about, and want to ensure that we are able to sustain as we think about the types of opportunities we can create for folk in our communities.
Great. I can fill in. It's a very similar story. And Andrew, maybe you could throw up this slide for the theory of change for Rising Tide, the third slide. So essentially very similar to D'Artagnan, we also started with our personal funds and other individuals, our moms and dads and everybody else that could be convinced that they needed to do this with us. So it started with very, very small grants, family support, and then we actually had a local corporation that had been kind of funding a variety of different things, but somewhat demoralized. And we went to them and approached them and worked on convincing them to become a sponsor. And they kind of gave us the cold shoulder a little bit and said, you know what, nothing works in this community. So what makes you think you're going to succeed? So we gave it our earnest try there, and they said, you don't even have a brochure. You have all of this wonderful ideas, but come back to us when you've gotten a brochure. So we went, we got a brochure, approached them, and this person was convinced that we were really eager to try. And when they gave us that first $5,000, she said, use our logo and leverage our logo. So that was the first hint that we had that that other corporations wanted to be seen as doing good in community, where some of it is by obligation. So if you're in the kind of field that we're in, where you're doing entrepreneurial work or economic development, community building, certainly the kind of the critical work that's been done in the policy arena from the Community Reinvestment Act side. There are banks that have to spend certain amounts of money, provide certain access to resources within communities that have been traditionally marginalized. So that was one of our strategies, was to kind of make sure we get those banks to basically pay for this work. And so that's one strategy. So that actually, even to date, a certain significant portion, and I have, Andrew, I don't know if you've gotten that slide up, but we have 40% of our funding comes from companies and the private sector, corporations. We also have government support. The government support currently is about 15% of our budget. Right now we're at about 2.5, actually soon to be 3 million in budget. And one thing that we realized also was we kind of went with the individual and private sector first, because one of the things that ends up happening often is, depending on where you are, politics can have an undue influence in the kind of work that you're doing. And so we basically decided to approach our government for funding once we had established a certain track record and had kind of our community buy-in, where our politicians are really coming to see the work and be accountable and be investing in amongst others. So especially if you're kind of in our neck of the woods, sometimes politics can be a blood sport. So we really didn't want to get kind of pulled in that way. So it's worked out marvelously. It means that when we have our Community Business Academy graduations, which often can pull in as many as, we'd have 120 or so graduating entrepreneurs. They bring their family members. And so you have like 400 or 500 person events around entrepreneurship that happen on a regular basis, like clockwork in our community. That means these, our political leaders are coming and speaking to these entrepreneurs and, being accountable and having a dialogue. And so that's, I think a really important consideration in looking at government as a revenue source and making sure that it's, you know, it can be a mix. That's the ideal, and I know it doesn't work out that way all the time, but it's certainly something worth pursuing. And then we have about 9% of our income that's earned income, and certainly that's, you know, that's slow to grow. So we have very minimal but registration fees for our programs, so our entrepreneurs are contributing to the sustainability of our organization. And then we have, as D'Artagnan also mentioned, started down the path of sharing our kind of proprietary information, all of our, you know, from our outcome tracking databases, and you can call it basically a local economy operating system that we then license to other like-minded organizations that don't, frankly, and shouldn't have to start from where we were 10 years ago to do this work. And so we are bringing our curriculum, our operating system, everything to bear for our partners in other parts of the country to be able to license this. So we just started this in Chicago as a beta test 2 years ago, and it's going phenomenally well. So that is very, very encouraging. So that's another source of earned income that would contribute to our sustainability. And then increasingly, it is the private family foundations. Those are often, yeah, they could be a source of larger amounts of funds than the usual suspects, but it's also often attached to special initiatives or new things that you're working on. And unless it's in rare circumstances, it's often not multi-year, and it's often not there to stay and sustain you for the long term. And so we've used those kinds of grant opportunities to build our capacity significantly. But in terms of kind of the day-to-day operating of this, you know, we basically run right now 10 simultaneous community business academies, which are essentially 13-week sessions on a semester basis. We run 10 simultaneously each semester in English and Spanish. So having that, you know, part of what we've discovered in our work, often, you know, around entrepreneurship, it's kind of like, oh, you know, when there's funding for it or when there's something special initiative, there will be some session here or another or some classes here and there, but there isn't that kind of sustained clockwork, like literally, you know, you can count on it that it's happening. That kind of consistency requires that you have the consistency of funding to make sure you're delivering and the community could count on it. That entrepreneurs who are not ready today could apply and say, you know, in a year they might be ready. They might be in a place where, you know, it's appropriate for them. So doing that requires having that kind of sustained base of support, and it may not be from kind of the fancy foundations that may come in and, you know, do some special initiative. So it's a tapestry. And just managing that, you know, it's called fund accounting. Once you start to do it at this level, that is in itself kind of a science and an art, and but a very important one for long-term sustainability of a model like this.
Thanks, Alfa. I think the lesson here is that you have to have a very diverse portfolio, and you can't just be reliant upon one or two sources of funds in order to be sustainable long-term and to scale. And Alfa, how many people or staff or volunteers did you guys start out with? Gosh, it's what, coming up on 9 years? No, you incorporated in 07, 06?
2004.
Oh, okay. So it's been 11 years now. So when you first started in 2004, what was the staffing and volunteer requirements versus what they are now? And tell us a little bit more about why that is a critical component to your work.
Absolutely. Your team is everything. Now, when we started out, it was just the two of us, my co-founder, Alex Forrester, and I. And that was the case for the first 2 years. You know, we could pull in volunteers from time to time. We could, you know, count on a few contracted support, but essentially was the two of us. And one of the things that we realized was that this mission, this work, in order to do it as well as we need to do it in this 21st century, we have to have the quality of staffing. So we were committed to raise the funds. So for a very long time, both Alex and I were the least paid employees, sometimes the unpaid employees. And we wanted to bring the caliber of instruction and also people who had business experience, who run successful small businesses, but who also understood failing multiple times, who kind of displayed that resiliency, who understood what it's like when you don't pay your taxes and you're trying to deal with the IRS. And so like real hard, you know, skills around navigating the complexity of our economic system when you're under-resourced. So finding those people, recruiting them, training them, that was, you know, that was a big deal for us. We always knew from the get-go, as soon as we met our entrepreneurs, basically, and we did this straight out of college. And so we, you know, everybody would always ask us, hey, did you get your MBA? And we're like, no, actually, you know, we learned that on the streets. But as soon as we met our entrepreneurs, we knew they deserved the highest quality instruction, advisory services, that no more messing around, essentially. And that we couldn't just give them answers from Google or whatever and say, hey, how about doing it this way? Or like, here's what a business plan looks like. We felt that all of that fell short. And also, you know, having appropriate advisory services can be trickier because you think, well, you know, there is the Small Business Administration, there is SCORE, the Retired Executives Network, you know, there are small business development centers. But what we found, we would walk into these resources with our entrepreneurs, and often there was just a huge mismatch and disconnect between where our entrepreneurs were starting and where a lot of these resources were. And so I'll say no more, but I will say that the commitment was that we needed to get the staffing. So we started with just 2 of us, and then brought on our first instructor of the Community Business Academy, who is now, so he's been with us for many years. He's now actually managing director of all of our programs. And we, you know, recruited a number of volunteers, a class of 21 volunteers to actually be subjected to our curriculum before we subjected our own entrepreneurs to the curriculum itself. And so lots and lots of hand-holding. And then it went, like, within 3 years, we were at a staff of 5. And then we gradually went up to 8. Now we're at a staff of full-time 30, with 10 of those being AmeriCorps Vista members, and the rest being deployed across our programs and the back-end infrastructure, from outcome measurement to finance to fundraising and development work to you know, part-time HR, et cetera. So, you know, the last part of the organization to get built out, the one that I'm, you know, furiously working on, is that fundraising and development infrastructure. Alex and I, my co-founder, and I were basically kind of that team for a very, very long time, and now it's time to build that out. And it's hard because a lot of funders just don't want to pay for that other core infrastructure piece. When you're a nonprofit, everybody wants to focus on programmatic resources. One thing I will say on that has been kind of part of the reason why I think we've been very successful has been we never kind of, there's that pressure that you should only apply for often it's light item grants and you have to apply for a specific program to get funded. We just would submit the entire organizational budget as the project's budget. We just refused to say that there is any way that you could do this other program without having the infrastructure to support it. And we saw a lot of, and we learned from a lot of our community nonprofits who were just struggling because they're starving to their organization in terms of capacity to execute at a high level consistently because they are only getting grants to do programs. And we just kept submitting the entire project and saying, yep, this is the full budget is what it's going to take, and your contribution, if you're, if we're submitting for, $1.2 million an org budget, then, your $50,000 is going to support that budget. So that enabled us. It doesn't work always, but enabled us for the vast majority of time to have unrestricted support, essentially, operating support.
Yeah, you have to get pretty creative, and you have to not settle for no answers a lot, because in this industry, you get told no a lot because you're oftentimes doing things that haven't been done traditionally, or they're outside of the box, and that's just the creative nature of this work. D'Artagnan, can you tell us a little bit about your staffing and your volunteers that you employ at your organization?
Absolutely, and in fact, similar to Alpha, I can relate in many ways to the struggle. We started off, and I, as a founder, was very much unpaid, right? And I think, I just want to highlight for our viewers that there's so much value in doing the work as a labor of love. And there's a different type of commitment that I think comes with it when you have folks that are on the ground working in communities, especially vulnerable communities, to help shape outcomes with very little to no resources. And then to see our organizations get to the point where they are is transformative because it lets people know that it's possible, right? That I think that if you're considering beginning an organization in a community where there may not be a CDC or there may not be, the type of investment support or capital you need to help facilitate local enterprise, that you can still make change happen. So with that being said, we also started off with quite a few volunteers as well and began to pay staff. I was the last paid employee for our organization once we began to pay our team members fully. And I think one of the ways we were able to overcome that was by demonstrating outcomes, was by showing people the work. And so as foundations, and to Alpha's point, we presented budgets that said, hey, listen, this is the total scope of the work. It's not just this program-related expense. It's not just, the cost of materials or the cost of the training. It is the core operating support. It is the rent. It is what it takes to keep the lights on. It's the, paying for the water for the building, right? It's getting and ensuring that those resources are going to core operating activities as well. That allowed us to get past, I think, the challenge of relying entirely on volunteers. So as we were able to build capacity internally, we were to hire some of those folk who started off very early on and brought their expertise to the table as well. And so we were able to and learn from this, learn from the challenges that in order to sustain our work, we had to pursue funding resources and do some development work that allowed us to pay people. And so I think at the end of the day, that's what allowed us to do that. That's what helped us do it. And it was making the argument that our work was just as valuable in the context of our environment as that of others as well.
Yeah, it's like anything. When you have the right tools, the job is so much easier, and it's like that with staffing and volunteers. D'Artagnan, why don't we stay with you for the next question around biggest challenge or a particular failure that you and your organization have experienced, and what did you learn from that, and how do you anticipate the next challenge or next failure in your work?
So one of the biggest challenges we ran into initially being under-resourced was the difficulty in acquiring capital. And so we wanted to make investments in local businesses and provide sort of technical assistance to local businesses, but we found it to be very challenging in being able to do that. So I'll give you a good example. So as a nonprofit organization, I've talked about this model of this being a nonprofit organization, but we also launched a for-profit social enterprise to help build out and sustain the work. And we launched that for-profit with the goal of building equity into sort of that enterprise so that we can reinvest in the local community. Well, we found it to be quite challenging running that entity as a subsidiary of our not-for-profit, given all of the sort of legal compliance requirements that are needed in order to maintain our nonprofit tax-exempt status, but to also bring in capital for that for-profit enterprise. And so we found that that trying to have an entity that housed a lot of the social entrepreneurship work without it being fully integrated within the organization, within sort of the parent organization, did not work very well for us. And we've seen others be able to do this, I think, very successfully, have sort of these hybrid models, but we found that a hybrid model did not work. And so what we were able to do was build in our enterprise activities into sort of the broader model and ensure that it falls within the mission of our nonprofit organization. And actually decide no longer to pursue any sort of equity investments, right? To not pursue the type of for-profit capital investments that one might be eligible for if they were running an entity of that sort. And so we learned that the need in our community had to remain as sort of the priority and had to dictate what we did. And so while we were trying to bring these other models into use within our space, we recognized that they didn't apply the same given the work that we were doing.
Great, thank you. Alfa, can you tell us a little bit about a failure that you guys experienced with Rising Tide Capital? Something that really was either eye-opening or maybe caught you off guard?
Well, if you're doing the kind of work we're doing, that's a dime a dozen. But I would say that first, it's great to hear this from D'Artagnan. So, being surrounded by entrepreneurs, there's definitely a constant desire to figure out a way in which we can do the work that we're doing in a way that could be financially self-sustaining. And so ultimately we never went down the path of starting any for-profit activities. In part, we've just, had our hands full as well. But one thing that I would say, however, is one of the challenges in doing our work is we have a lot of needs. So, for instance, the class is one component. The 13 classes, the Community Business Academy, that's solid. It's you have to continue to version your curriculum and infuse it with a lot of that kind of the new learning. But the postgraduate services, which is part of where our deepest value lies, is in that hand-holding and support for our entrepreneurs over the long term. And that work, to do it in a way that doesn't tank you is very, very challenging because there are like deep needs for businesses. Some incubators will do this kind of work and do it with a handful, 15 or so. And we kind of went with the idea that we really wanted to create a concentrated tipping point effect in our community of many entrepreneurs. And so, we have over 500 businesses that we're supporting. It's probably over 600 just even this year. And that's a lot of resource coordination. It's a lot of, it's just like, it's madness. And so we're constantly feeling like we're, failing at doing that in a way that feels turnkey, that feels sustainable. And so it's been a part of our kind of holdout on even doing the replication work and the licensing work, just as like a multi-headed hydra that, we're constantly saying, how do we make this manageable? So one way that we have tried to do this has been to try and introduce technology in a way that is appropriate. And so for our entrepreneurs, it's really kind of, face-to-face work. It's in their community, over their kitchen tables, at the store, at, wherever they are. It's very high touch. That's something that we've, recognized as working best. But then, you start thinking, hey, maybe there's a way in which through technology, I can ease the burden here or control for costs over here. And so we've been working on a couple of technology development projects that hold great promise, but I will say that it's been a path of, it's like it's a war. It's a path of many battles lost and won. And there have been times where, we've tried to take shortcuts in the development process for the technology products that we're rolling out for our entrepreneurs. And there's always, it's like one step forward, 14 back, and then you're like, okay, I'm at like -7, up. It's just, so what I will say is you do have to have that kind of love and commitment and vision to say, this is going to take a long time to get right, but you kind of have to learn from your mistakes and apologize. We've had to apologize to funders. When you're doing this work, nobody wants to go to a funder and say, I told you this will be done in 12 to 18 months, and it's not going to be done for 24 to 36 months. Nobody wants to say that, and especially because the way the funding climate is, often your funders are just giving you resources for a 12-month period, and they want to see the world entire changed within that 12 months. You, by 6 months, are still going through like your list of potential candidates to do the work, or so picking up that phone call to say, Miss, Mrs., Mr., sorry, this is not looking, it's not going to pan out. And it's always stressful because you worry that you'll lose that funding source or that you'll, damage your reputation. But frankly, that hasn't happened every time that I've had to have those difficult conversations with our funders. They've come along and given us the breathing room. So it's that's what I'll say about it.
Thank you. Yeah, it's always a you don't know what you don't know, and I think it's this sector and this work is all built upon your past experiences and failures and successes, and you don't know when you're making a mistake until you make it and look back at it. And I think that's really what gives us the tools to do a better job in the future and to just have more moxie in the work and going forward. So part of at the core of what you and D'Artagnan are doing, you have some key objectives. You've hinted at them and talked a little bit about them, but Alfa will stay with you for this one, and then we'll move to D'Artagnan. But what are the key objectives that your model is addressing, and you know, how are the programs built out to support those objectives?
So we also measure our impact on some key kind of areas and needles that we'd like to see moving. You know, a first and primary objective for us is the individuals in our communities who are raising their hands to say, you know what, despite the odds, despite the very limited opportunity and sometimes systemically limited opportunity, they are going to give it a go. They're going to try it. They're going to go out and be vulnerable and say they have an idea, or they're working on this business, or yeah, they're going to transition out of this other job and do this thing. And so that vulnerability brings with it the biggest vulnerability and risk, which is financial. It's, you know, generating some kind of an income is just essential. It's, you know, it's ground A. And so we're pretty committed in helping them move the needle on generating income that can support their, you know, personal and household viability. So the business is, you know, great. Sometimes, you know, it may not be the most environmentally friendly, or it may, like, it has, you know, it's going to look what it looks like as they're cobbling their way and getting out to the marketplace and actually interacting with customers. And so there is, you know, making sure that they can move the personal household income needle forward is one. Secondarily, obviously, the business revenue has to be there in order to make that a reality. And so making that business revenue needle move then means supporting their sales activities. And supporting their sales activities all of a sudden takes you into the back end of their operations. You know, in order to be able to produce a quality product or a service, you know, they need that kind of management support. And so, but moving business revenue generation forward is, you know, objective, a primary objective. And then you have the fact that in order to do that and to do that quality delivery of work and actually have this enterprise or this idea actually be a sustainable one and one that can grow, especially if you're in the New York metro area, you're talking about, you know, somebody needing to, in our kind of average entrepreneur's case, in order for that mom with the 2 kids who's making $35,000 a year to be financially sustainable, she needs to make $50,000, just bare bottoms financial, you know, sustainability. So doing that work, often because so many of our entrepreneurs do start out in the service arena, that's just what it is in terms of you know, being able to do something that doesn't require a ton of capital to start, you know, they can't work themselves to death, right? So they do need help. And in order to be able to get to the point where they can bring others on board, it often requires significant commitment on the part of customers or the potential of that kind of market opportunity. And so building up their visibility becomes, you know, an essential component of this. So we have to build up their business's visibility, their own kind of visibility in the community, and be able to derive that credibility that then makes other potential investors, potential capital sources that we approach on their behalf and with them actually pay attention to them. And so you're then talking about, you know, all kinds of brand building activities, and we're kind of a mini PR firm for our entrepreneurs, placing stories about them in local media, supporting them in their social media so they actually have followers. Believe it or not, there are vendor opportunities that are now determined on the basis of how many followers, Twitter followers or Facebook followers you have, whether you're a credible business or not. And so we kind of have to be like, all right, we got to make it happen. And so building programming that enables us to do this at a quality level and in a way that we can just repeat and it's not a one-trick pony is an essential part of that. And that also really gets to the most important work we see ourselves doing, which is the social capital piece. So when you're doing that, you know, so we may have one needle that we're trying to move. We want our businesses to have customers. We want them to be able to hire others so they're not working themselves to death, and we want them to be able to hire in ways that can enable them to attract quality talent, be able to train those individuals, be able to support their living wage, and so on. So what you're then talking about is building up this social capital network for these entrepreneurs and their visibility in that community, which helps us do a number of other things, intentionally. But we're looking at moving one needle, but we know it does all of these other things, which is building up the leadership capacities of our entrepreneurs. Because all of a sudden they're seen as leaders in their community, they're tapped for a number of leadership positions, which also supports then their own personal sustainability in doing this. And then there are, other things that we see happen. Public assistance reliance then starts falling, and that's something that is, frankly, it's we see it happening, and we know that that's an important objective for certain types of supporters of ours, whether they're in the government arena or otherwise. And we kind of look at it, with mixed views, because on the one hand, we know part of the kind of the valley that our entrepreneurs have to cross is, having their public assistance fall because they're generating more income, but sometimes they're not yet at a point where they're generating enough. And so it's a real struggle for us to make sure that we're building that resiliency within our entrepreneur community. So they're actually bartering for things and supporting one another to kind of make up for that fall in kind of public assistance and support. And so, that also means we have like a zillion community partners that we're deeply connected to make sure that this happens. So kind of pulling back out from the weeds, our approach is really, and I know, Andrew, if you have a slide, you can show our impact slide as I'm talking through this. I think it's our second slide there. The cool thing about what we're seeing is now that we've been at it in a concentrated fashion, and we have over 1,000 entrepreneurs, there is definitely the kind of social network where our entrepreneurs are partnering together to do all kinds of resiliency initiatives on their own. And we're seeing this happen live in front of us. They're sponsoring each other's work. They are volunteering for each other's businesses. They are sharing employees. They're sharing space. They're putting together susus and so on. So it's you start to see that happen if you kind of build with a few focused needles that you need to move. So our broad agenda is basically to go deeper. We believe that impact happens on the depth axis. So the deeper and deeper and deeper you go, the more you can move the needles. And then so there's a deeper initiative, and that deeper initiative has a lot of interesting spokes that we can explore. So it's deeper, broader, and better. And better is, the broader is the replication. We want others in other communities that are like-minded to be able to have access to this. So we want to replicate and get it out there and get the resources. And we want to do it as a white label solution. So it's not Rising Tide Chicago. It's not Rising Tide D'Artagnan. It's, that community, because we believe social entrepreneurs want to, they like creating their own stuff. And so it's not about parachuting in and being like, oh, we've got this cool thing happening and we're Rising Tide, but rather giving this local social entrepreneur or entrepreneurial organization the capacity that we can bring on the back end, kind of like Intel, and just enable them to do what they need to do and do it better than maybe even we are doing it. So that's the broader part of the way we approach it, and the better part is where it's the technology initiatives. It's also the local living economies. So really building not only the kind of the tools to survive and generate income and build assets and wealth within the community, but actually connects to this vision of what it takes to do this within a new economy. So that kind of leadership and information and changing local policy through our own entrepreneurs is really exciting to see emerging.
That's exciting. That's really informative, Alpha. Thank you. D'Artagnan, I'll give you the next question around timing and logistical considerations, because I think the Social Justice Learning Institute is a really unique model that is doing some really great work in your neck of the woods. But looking back and in your experience in setting up the organization and learning and failing and succeeding, for somebody to kind of get into this type of work or to start something similar or another unique model, can you tell our audience about what you've learned about the timing that it takes and the logistical considerations that somebody should probably take into consideration when they go on and start some new venture like this?
Oh, absolutely. And I think Andrew's going to slide 16 for me, and I'll sort of start there. This is such a great question. One of the things that I think we began with as a priority within our organization is understanding the urgency that existed for folks in our community and the need. So if you can look here on this slide where I have up here to show you that we live in what we consider to be a food swamp, right? So just for the sake of the viewers, you can see there's a liquor store, there's a 7-Eleven, so there are tons of chain store restaurants, there's a McDonald's, and all the way over to the right are collard greens from Vons in the organic food section. And so here we have these food options in the city. So when we think about sort of the logistical considerations that need to be factored in, we thought that it was important to start building the right sort of tools through people. So if we go to the next slide, there are a number of programs that we launched. So we launched our 100 Seeds of Change Food System Initiative. We launched our Urban Health Fellowship Program. We launched our Community Supported Agriculture Program, began classes, build food assets. So on the following slide, where it says Health Equity Programs, what we decided to do was build a group of leaders. And in this model, realized that we had to think about building capacity in a strategic way. We had to think about what it meant to create the types of people in our community who could go out as entrepreneurs and transform the food environment. And so this is an example of our Urban Health Fellowship. It's a program that we've now run for the past 3 years. We piloted it 1 year, and then we got funding from the California Wellness Foundation and partnered with UCLA Medical Center to help train a group of young men to become health advocates in the community so that they can, one, either pursue careers in that field or two, start businesses in that field to help address some of those issues that you saw earlier in the food swamp slide. And so we realized how important it was for our young folk to be brought into the solutions based on the needs that were identified, needs that they identified. If you look at the next slide where it says our Inglewood Certified Farmers Market, so slide 19, it shows you how really what it looks like to actually run these programs. So let's talk a little bit about logistical considerations. If you look at the area, right, it required that we have the internal expertise to work with our local government to help pursue things like permits, help people get business licenses. So all of these vendors had to be licensed to do business in the city of Inglewood. So we had to work with them to do their licenses. They had to be compliant with the environmental health agency. So we had to make sure that they were compliant. We had to help ensure that they were meeting certain food safety requirements. So if you look at the initial slide that I showed you with the food environment, the liquor stores, the chain restaurants, the poor access to fresh fruits and veggies, and then you look at this slide, it's a completely different environment, right? So you have local entrepreneurs on the ground in their community feeding people directly from goods that they're producing, and we set some criteria which said, hey, listen, this food needs to be healthy. It can't be food that you would buy at the local chain restaurant or at a venue that is not feeding you healthy food. We need to provide alternatives to our existing food system that allows our local food vendors to sell their food here within the community. And I'm highlighting this because, you know, traditionally farmers markets bring local farmers to the table, but we decided to go a step beyond by bringing not only local farmers, but bringing local food vendors and artisans to this market and providing it as an opportunity. And it required that we have both the legal structure to sustain and pursue this type of alternative, but also the expertise to help our vendors become compliant and certified for the market. So if you go to the next slide, on slide 20, it just, again, gives you a sense of what was needed. And so we were able to work with local law enforcement as well as teach people how to eat and live healthier lives. So even though they came out to the market, even though they came out to these spaces to shop for local foods, they still needed, some folks still needed support and understanding on how to take advantage of additional resources that they may have been eligible for. So we reached out to people in our community who may have been Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program eligible, or we commonly known as the Food Stamp Program, who might have been eligible for using their food stamps, and we said, hey, listen, we have some matching dollars for you. We reached out to our seniors in our community, and we said, hey, listen, we have a senior voucher program. Come out and spend sort of your money here in this space, and we'll help you double your dollar so you can double your impact, thus supporting our entrepreneurs as well, providing for additional sources of revenue for them so they can sustain their businesses. And so, again, in thinking about sort of the model, you know, there are a number of agencies that are able to do this either as for-profits or as not-for-profits, but we understood sort of the value of doing this both sustainably as well as with philanthropic support, because typically enterprises like this take anywhere between $50,000 to $70,000 a year to run, and they don't start off as being profitable enterprises. So having a not-for-profit agency helps sustain this enterprise as it gets off its feet with investment from philanthropic sources, allows these entrepreneurs to sustain their businesses, right? So whereas, and to not have to worry about seeking out loans so that they can run their enterprise. So here's one of the other sort of, I think, benefits of this, right? We're able to create the space, create the marketplace for them to do the work that they like to do without having to bear all of the risk and come up with all of the capital to sell their goods. And so I think understanding that would allow, I think, folks to see sort of the value and the benefits of doing it in multiple ways as well. And then also understanding sort of the legal and policy expertise that are needed to navigate the spaces, navigate our government institutions, our civic institutions, so that an enterprise like this can be made available for local entrepreneurs.
Yeah, that's really good work, impressive work, and I congratulate you on creating an alternative to that food swamp that your community is living in. I mean, if people like you don't do it, it's not going to get done, and that's part of the, you know, there's a lot of pressure in the work that you and Alpha are doing, and you have to be able to maintain that optimism and that excitement over the work. I know in my community, Andrew, if you can go to the arts market slide, actually, let's see, it would be the fourth slide, I believe. We created a farmer's market using all hyper-local farmers and gardeners from the Native community, because we have one of the most dense Native populations in the country in South Minneapolis, and they lack that same thing, that access to quality, healthy food. And so we just created it ourselves, and we said, we have farmers and gardeners that are spending a lot of time investing a lot of resources into their farms, but we had to be creative in drawing them in there and incentivizing them to set up with this new farmers market. And it took over a year of planning to really even get this little cute farmers market to pop up, because we had to raise funds to support the farmers' time to come out and spend an afternoon in our community in a new market. We had to build relationships with a local hospital and clinic, and just the red tape that goes into that is really frustrating. So I think when we're talking about creating new initiatives and looking at logistical considerations, there's so much work that goes into it. It's the work behind the work is the way I like to describe it, because when you look at the previous slide, the third slide, Andrew, if you could pull that up, we also, looking in our community, trying to create new opportunities for people that were kind of working in economies that weren't viable yet, or they needed that extra, they were pre-entrepreneurs. So we fundraised $500,000 to improve a local light rail station in our community. And so now we actually have artists down there in the summer selling their goods and their artwork. And it's really helping to change the scope and the scale of the community and what we can and can't do. But a lot of that was pushing back when we're being told no. And so all of that work is really integral to making sure that you're making positive change. And sometimes when you're building the bicycle as you ride it, you don't know some of those things. And so it takes, I know this project, the Arts Marketplace, we raised funds in 2012, and we just finished it in 2015. And we thought naively that it was going to be a 6 to 8 month project, and it ended up being a multi-year project because of politics and because of municipalities and red tape. And so you have to anticipate a lot of that. And I would say it's like any development project. You have to anticipate extra costs and things that you wouldn't anticipate. And all of that is a drain on the budget too. So for our audience and listeners, I think it's a good way to kind of get acquainted is to study Alfa's and D'Artagnan's organizations and kind of see how much goes into it, because they put on it's a really slick product, but I mean there's so much more that goes into it. So given that, what would D'Artagnan, will stay with you and then we'll jump over to Alfa, but what are your top 3 tips for someone starting down this road? What would you tell a young D'Artagnan looking back, if you could?
You know, it's funny you asked that question, because I get folk who reach out to me, as I'm sure you both you, Jay, and Alfa receive inquiries all the time. I get folk who reach out to me and they say, hey, I'm thinking about starting a nonprofit. What would you recommend that I do? And I always encourage folk to, or I'm thinking about starting a business, what would you recommend that I do? I always encourage folk to just start begin to do the work. What I've come to realize is that if you sort of start off with, when I started off the work, I didn't start off really knowing all that I would need to do in order to build sort of the enterprise. I started off with skills that I thought were really, really helpful, but I didn't know, all the things I need to do to be legally compliant with X or with Y or with Z. And so I really encourage people to start with their idea and to get out there and learn. Because if you don't do that and sort of get bogged down in and sort of overthinking it, then I think nothing will get done. And so that's what I've come to find with a lot of folk. Especially with our young folk, who would like to get out there and start their own businesses. We will get them into places where they can just start selling their goods, or they can start having conversations about their business model, et cetera. So that's one of the first things. One of the other things I would encourage people to do is to immediately think about a revenue model. And so it is important to, while it's important to begin the work, it's also important to think very early about how to sustain the work and how to raise money for that work. And so, you know, if you're selling a product or if you're looking to provide a service, figure out a way to monetize it, because monetizing that product or services will be what allows people to sustain the work. When I began my work, I didn't think about monetizing it initially. I didn't think about it as being a sort of a product that could be sustained, as a model that could be invested in. I thought about it as a model that could be replicated, and I thought, because there's a need. And I also thought that, you know, really, for us as a social justice organization, we shouldn't be worried about money, right? You know, capital is not really the reason we should be out here doing this work. We should be doing it because it's the right thing to do, because it's good for the community, because people very much care about where they live, and we care about place and space. And so let's just do it for all the right reasons. But I think if you don't consider your revenue from the very beginning, it makes it that much more difficult to sustain the work later on down the road as you begin to build traction, begin to build momentum. And then finally, I would say to know that this work is all about relationships. It's all about building opportunities between people and connecting with other people, people that are like-minded, people that have different ideas. But if it were not for our students going out into the community, bringing community members to the table, and then connecting with our local elected officials, our mayor at the time, and then another school board member who said, hey, I support this, I'm going to support the work that you all are doing, we wouldn't be here. If it were not for those relationships with people, we wouldn't be in this place. If it were not for relationships with our funders, if it were not for an ability to have conversations with people and share with them really the outcomes and impact of our work, we would not be here. So one, again, do the work. Two, think about how you're going to sustain and fund that work. And then three, build relationships with key stakeholders and people that that can be of impact to the work.
Great way to wrap that up, D'Artagnan. I appreciate that. I mean, it's so much of this work is your network, and you know, you need to really cultivate that and grow that, and it's being authentic and showing up, not just for your benefit, but also for those that are like-minded and that are kind of doing the same work and want the same impact in their communities. You have to show up, and that really says a lot. So thank you for that. Alfa, what do you wish you knew at the beginning of when you started Rising Tide, you and your co-founder, that I guess you didn't anticipate, or that what skills would have really helped you even be more of a springboard with Rising Tide?
Great question. I think the one that is most important is to understand no one will take you seriously, at least for the first 3 years, if not more, of the work that you're doing. And so just like that saying, dance like no one is watching, you kind of need to embrace this work and realize that you know, the world is kind of a cynical place often, and for good reasons, and especially if you want to do this kind of work in communities that have been you know, betrayed time and time again, and there's very little trust, and trust is like the most important commodity, then you have to realize that that's not personal, that you know, don't take it personally if no one takes you seriously. I think along that line, you know, I wish I knew, but there was no way to know, but I wish I knew how long it takes to build successful businesses. I think so many of us who are trying to do enterprise development or business development at local levels assume that if the right resources were in play, that, you know, a business would be just up and running, and access to capital, access to markets, and voila, you know. But it actually doesn't work that way, and that many, and this is impressive to me because I'm so amazed by the complexity of the economy that we actually exist in, but many of the businesses that we interact with, it's like they they couldn't be where they are even before, like, 10 years of work. Like, so sometimes for vast majority, when you sit down with entrepreneurs and talk to them about how long it took to build their businesses, they tell you they really, like, they didn't know all of the moving pieces or, get that level of comfort for the first 10 years. And now that I'm 10 years old as an organization, I could say, yeah, I look like an established business, but I actually feel like a startup business many of the times. I'm like, oh, good, finally, So it takes a really, really long time. So have that kind of long view. I would also say that for many of us who are in this work, part of the local economy movement, or if you're looking to do the kind of work that we're doing, you kind of, definitely the relationship piece. It's all about relationships. Social capital applies to you as much as the communities in which you want to work. And so you have to build that network for yourself and your organization. But most importantly, you have to be comfortable with the thought that you may not be able to see, that you may be nourishing riverbanks that you may not be able to see in the immediate future. And that doesn't mean that you don't measure your impact. In fact, it's one of my first and foremost advice that, you have to be committed to measuring your impact one way or another, even though it feels like when you're just starting out, you have so much going on. Who has the time to do any of that kind of quote unquote bean counting? You have to do the bean counting in terms of your financial systems. You also have to do the bean counting in terms of what impact you think you're having and start collecting that data so you can analyze it at a different point or have others who can support you in analyzing it, but be committed to it. Even if you don't know how to do it, be committed to it. That is the world that we're living in, and it's the world that we're moving towards. So you're at a severe disadvantage if you're doing lots of great work and it's all anecdotes, but you can't be able to share that for the kinds of people and investors that might be able to look at your work 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the line when you're ready. It's that data that can then come and back you up and back up your anecdotes and all of the good work that you've been doing. And then, I'll go to my fifth year, my fifth grade English teacher and her advice, where she used to just say to us all the time, look beyond the obvious. And for instance, a specific example around this is, especially for all of us who are working in like local communities, local politics and local government leadership is something that comes up. And I'm a government major, so even though that's not what I do, I find this insight to be very, very helpful. For a vast majority of our political systems, it's very short term, and part of that is it's built on what I call the alternate credit system. And so your local politicians get elected based on being able to take credit for stuff that they have had a hand in or have done. And so that credit taking that they need to do, if you recognize it as like, well, that's the underlying system here, rather than kind of being annoyed by it and exacerbated by it, just look at it as a system that you have to work with, in which case then what are opportunities that you can offer that are going to enable those political leaders to take credit for things that are valid and reasonable, because that's your long-term sustainability in that community too. So I find often there's a lot of, frustration that that people have to deal with politics. But at the end of the day, it's part of the reality of the system in which we operate. It's part of what allows for, governance. There needs to be good governance. There needs to be good policies. But in order for that to happen, we have to just kind of recognize the realities of the system we're operating in and figure out a way in which we can help local leaders to succeed so that they can sit at the table and have real conversations with you about what needs to happen in the future, as opposed to having this kind of dance and nobody knows like why it's happening. And, there's all the criticism of like, oh, he just wants to take credit for that, or, I've been doing all the work at the local level. Why is that guy coming over and he just wants the podium, And it's just like, we need to get past all of that. We need to get past all of that and get lickety quick, split into the reality of like, we want to make this change happen, and so how do we build coalitions, and how do we do that by being kind of very much open-minded. And I'll close by saying that part of coalition building, partnership building, the skill set that I think someone who's starting out needs to develop is, you know, it's wonderful to be visionary, and you have to cultivate that in yourself as part of being a good leader, but you have to have a vision that is big enough to encompass the visions of others. And so when you go in, and I'm, you know, one of the worst offenders in this regard, I have very big visions and big ideas, and I get so excited. But one discipline that I've had and cultivated since my earliest days is to sit there, sit tight with your vision, listen to the vision of the person or organization that is before you, and see how it might play within your broader vision. So have a vision that is big enough to accommodate the visions of others. That will enable you to build long-lasting, trust-based relationships that can withstand the ups and downs of doing this work over the long term.
Wow, Alfa, that was informative, it was educational, it was everything that I wanted a final question to be answered with. So thank you so much for that. It's we want to encourage people that are new to this work to have all of those insights that you just shared with us. So that's invaluable. Thank you. We'll give D'Artagnan we're coming up on time, and we'll give D'Artagnan the last word here. What would you tell somebody, D'Artagnan, in a minute about this work, and how would you encourage them? What would you tell somebody getting into this kind of work?
Well, so I would encourage someone getting into this type of work by letting them know that that it does work, if it makes any sense. So here I am now. Similar to Alfa started some years ago. So I began my work back in 2006, but we incorporated in 2008. And here we are now in going to 2016, and almost 10 years after I've begun, I'm able to sort of sit in a place where we're maximizing and expanding our impact, not just here in Los Angeles, but throughout the state of California. So, you know, it is possible to get to this place. It is possible to successfully facilitate change in one's community, and to help support others doing the same in their own communities. And I think that, to me, is the takeaway, that it's hard work, but it is work that is well worth it, and that ultimately our communities will benefit because we're out here doing it. So if you're thinking about getting up, if you're thinking about moving, or if you're already actively involved and you're sort of at that place where maybe you're struggling, because God knows I was at a place where I was saying to myself, why am I still doing this when I don't have the resources to do it? And you know, by persevering, was able to get to the place where we are now, and are growing exponentially. So keep on keeping on, and you know, move forward expeditiously down your path. So that's what I would encourage people with.
Great way to sum that up, D'Artagnan. I'd like to thank D'Artagnan and Alfa. You can find them online, D'Artagnan's work at the Social Justice Learning Institute at sjli.org, and risingtidecapital.org, if you want to learn more about Alfa's work. They're impressive individuals. I'm proud to be a BALLE fellow, a fellow with them, and they're inspiring folks, and we thank you for joining us for this webinar, and please feel free to reach out to the folks at BALLE or any of us online. So thank you very much for your time, and I think we'll end with that. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jay.
Thank you so much, Jay.
Yes, thanks, and many thanks to all three of you for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. And that was a wonderful conversation that will definitely be helpful to those looking to catalyze localist action in their places. For more information on this and other local economy ecosystem models, be sure to visit the BALLE 101 Toolkit at the BALLE website, www.balocalists.org. Have a great day, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks.